Hey everybody, it's Chris Westergaard from The Language House. This is video number 3 in my grammar series. Video number 1 was all about your general approach. Video number 2 was actually how to teach the grammar, so the presentation part. In this video, the final video, we are covering how to make an actual grammar lesson. So we're going to start a lesson, we're gonna take it from beginning to end, and you'll end up keeping it. So watch the whole video for all of the different tips and check the link, which will eventually be posted below, to download the lesson yourself. If you like this channel, if you like what I do, please click the subscribe button. It makes me happy, it makes my mom happy. She loves seeing those numbers go up. Let's get started with the next video. If you remember in grammar video number 2, the grammar point that we're going to be using is the present perfect simple. The specific function is going to be life experience, and this is all going to take place under the umbrella topic of travel experience. So remember, watch video number 2 because it won't really make too much sense if you're just coming in here. All right, let's go over a typical grammar structure. All of your lessons can start with a warmer. Any type of warmer will do. Basically something fun to get the class talking a little bit. You can go online and find all different types of warmers that are suitable for your level. After the warmer comes your intro. This is where we try to engage the class with our topic. Be careful to not go into teaching grammar at this point. Intros, they're not about introducing the grammar point, it's more about the topic in general. So for example, in my lesson, it's all about travel experience, so I'm going to introduce that. The grammar will come later, as we see in a bit. After the introduction, which is really short, comes the lead-in, and the lead-in is essentially a series of questions that are related to your topic. The point of a lead-in is to get your students talking about your topic. In my intro, I get their attention, I introduce something fun, as we'll see in a bit. The lead-in is about speaking about the specific topic. After that's done, we go into the target language. Now, this is the section where we teach grammar. And if you haven't watched video number 2, please check that out because it covers all of the various different techniques and tips. Overall, you're looking at about 10 minutes to effectively elicit, board, CCQ, and get those functions and those rules of your grammar point across. Once this is done, we move into our study 1. And a study 1 is basically a controlled practice of your grammar point. So think of activities or worksheets that practice the grammar point on a very basic level. Fill in the blank or something similar to that. After your study 1 is your study 2. And this is a really critical part of your lesson. We'll talk about this later on in the video, but this is like a study 1, but it's more open practice. You're still kind of giving your students some barriers on what they can do and what they can't do with the grammar point. But in this stage, you're really focusing on practicing forming and asking questions with the grammar point and practicing those responses. So it's more open, meaning that it's not one right answer. You're working on all of the various different forms there. Finally, after the study 2 comes the main part of any grammar lesson or any productive lesson, which is your activation. We're going to be talking a lot more about activations in this video. So we'll come back to that. We got the structure, amazing. Let's now fill in all of the different parts. You might be thinking to yourself, well, I better start off with my intro and start planning from there. That's super wrong. You don't want to start with your intro. In actuality, what you want to do is start and plan your activation first, because your activation is your final goal. Your entire lesson leads up to this final goal and all of the different parts in the beginning that they're going to need. So always plan your activation first. What makes a good activation then? Good activations have a few key qualities. One is we want to have a real context. We want to put our students in a real life situation where this language is going to be used, because that is the main point. The lesson should end with our students using the language as they would in the real life. So we have to think of some sort of scenario or some sort of reason where this grammar point and where this topic would come up. Another thing that makes activations good is that there needs to be a clear task. Even if I put people in an actual context, like maybe ordering food in a restaurant or discussing various opinions about things, I can't just say role play. It doesn't work that specific way. I need to really task out and think like, how am I going to get the students to ask and answer questions using this grammar point? So clear task, super important. This is going to be student to student, meaning that the students are going to be asking all of the questions and giving all of the responses and really playing out the specific speaking activity. Good activations have a lot of student talking time. Fourth on the list is that there needs to be some sort of resolution or goal for this whole thing. You can't just have the students speak to each other, even if there is a clear task. In real life, we don't do this. There's usually a reason, a motivation, a goal, like a resolution, something that the students have to complete. And lastly, we've talked a lot about this. Good activations are authentic. They sound authentic. They use a lot of natural language throughout them, and they should be done without the use of a lot of notes. So I don't want my students reading a script or something like that. The language should be trained enough where it comes from within. And this is why it is really important to plan your activation first, because the rest of your lesson is going to be getting them to this part. If you plan this last, you'll realize that there's a lot of things in your lesson that are irrelevant and that don't really train your students for this final part. Okay, I got my activation for this lesson. If you remember, the grammar point that we're going to be using is the present perfect simple. The specific function is life experience. And our overall topic is going to be travel experience. So for my activation, my context is going to be students are applying for a job at a travel magazine. So some students are going to be owners of magazines looking for specific candidates. Other students are going to be job applicants with various different travel experiences. And they're going to have to try to pick the candidate who they think is the best. The task can be something like, please ask 8 questions about the person's travel experience. And for the people who are applying for the job, they have to try to embellish their experiences as much as possible. So we have our context, we have our task, which is ask 8 specific questions, and we have our resolution that is going to be pick the candidate who you think is the best. Right there, our activation is done. Obviously, you need to make some materials for this. You might tweak your task a little bit. You might add some props to this. But for the most part, for all intents and purposes, we're good. With the activation done, I can now begin to plan the rest of my lesson with everything leading up to that final goal. If I have a long class, I can start with a warmer, something that takes 5 or 7 minutes just to warm the class up. For your warmer, you don't need to pick anything special for it. It's really easy to find a whole bunch of different warmers if you want to use one. Personally, I oftentimes just go right into my introduction. So let's take a look at that. For intros, I want these to be pretty short. I want a little bit of participation from the students, but most importantly, I want them to be engaging. My intro is going to be like this. I'm going to come into the class dressed as if I've been on some sort of trip. I've got a lot of various different things related to traveling which I can elicit out from my students. So I have like sea shoes, and I have a biking helmet, and I have a boot for hiking, and I have a swimsuit, and I obviously have a towel and a hat. All of these things will help bring out some of that language related to travel activities and travel experience. This ends with the students telling me that this is about travel or travel-related things. A lot of times teachers don't want to do these things because they feel uncomfortable and they feel a little bit awkward doing it. But if you want to teach well, you have to try to engage your students. So do something that gets their attention, and note that none of this deals with the grammar point. I'm not talking about the present perfect. We're going to introduce that part later on in the lesson. Intro is done. It's now time for the lead-in. Quick little tip. Before I even do my intro, I'm going to have my leading questions up on the board. These are 3 to 5 questions related to my topic, And if you look at the questions that I've written, if you can see them, I don't know if you can or not, but you'll notice that I don't use any of the grammar. And the reason for this is that I don't want my leading questions to be about grammar in the present perfect. They should only be about topical stuff. So my topic of traveling, about going places, about holidays, about vacations. And the point of this is I want to create some solid student talking time in the beginning of my lesson. To do this effectively, right after my intro, I'm going to ask one of the students to ask me one of these questions. I'm going to give a brief demo of each question, and then I'm going to put students into pairs and groups and have them answer them on their own. Good leading questions are open, so they're not just yes or no responses. And the questions themselves, the language in the questions should be relatively easy. Thus, putting a lot of grammar, what you're teaching later on, in the questions is probably not a good idea. We got the lead-in done, and now it's ready for the target language part. The target language being my grammar point, the present perfect. Do watch video number 2 in my grammar series because we cover everything related to that part. Overall, you're looking at about 10 minutes where I board examples, I elicit out the terminology, the function, the structure, the various different rules, and then I CCQ everything. I get examples, we work on the negative structure, we work on the question structure. Overall though, that section is about 10 minutes. Watch video number 2 if you're not sure how to actually do that. After the target language, it can be a little bit tough, I know. Now comes your study 1. And if you remember, the study 1 is a closed and basic practice of your grammar point. Hopefully we'll be able to zoom in on this and get it. But what I've done for this study 1 is I've created a very basic fill in the blank sheet. And more importantly though, besides the fill in the blanks, is the content of it deals with a job interview. So it deals with people asking travel-related experience questions in the present perfect simple with an interviewer and an interviewee. And basically, I mean, if you think about it, it's almost the same setup or the same context as my activation. So even in my study 1, I'm prepping them a little bit for their activation. They're seeing some of that natural language and some of those questions that are going to come up later on in the lesson. It goes without saying that while they're working on this sheet, I'm going to be monitoring and interacting with the different pairs, making sure that we correct as much as we can while they're doing it. I'm going to be helping them with maybe some of the irregular verbs, etc., etc. And once basically everyone's done, we'll quickly review it as a class. Okay, done with study 1. Now it's time for study 2. Study 2s are usually the hardest things for new teachers to prepare because to do a good study 2, you really have to practice all of the language and the mechanics and the structures that are going to be used in your activations. Because the study 2 is all about open practice. It's no longer about writing in a word or a part of a verb. It's the students beginning to be able to form sentences on their own, both questions and answers, in a controlled environment. And study 2s are so important because if you don't practice this part now, if you don't have your students practice questions and answers and be able to respond in kind of a controlled way, your activation isn't going to work. There's no way you can have a study 1 which is writing, a verb in a blank, and then go to an activation, which is free use. You have to have something that bridges that specific gap. So study 2s are all about that. Now, what I've created for my study 2 is a sheet of paper that has a variety of different images of different travel-related things, different activities, different things that people can do when they're on a trip. And what I will do with this sheet is I will, again, put people in pairs or groups, and I will go over some of the structures related to asking and answering questions using the present perfect simple. Now, luckily, they saw some of this in their study 1, and a little bit of a spoiler, many of the verbs that come in the study 2 are in the blanks in their study 1. So by the time they get to this point, we've hopefully hashed out some of the irregulars and some of the things that they don't know. So the way that this would look is I'm going to tell students that they have to ask questions to each other to see if they have done these various different things. And I might even have different pictures for different people that have different photographs. Some are the same and some are different. And if they have the same picture that the other person has, they will say, yes, I have. So yes, I have scuba dived. And if they don't, they'll have to say, no, I've never scuba dived. Now, they should be able to do this because we covered the negatives in the target language section, and in my study 1, they saw some of these forms as well. So this is obviously not going to be super easy for them, but as they spend about 10 minutes doing it, their ability to be able to ask and answer these questions will increase dramatically. At this point, some of you I know are thinking, that study 2, it kind of seems like an activation. I mean, the students are in pairs, they're asking questions to each other, they're responding to the questions. It sounds kind of authentic. And you would be a little bit right, but you're not. This is not an activation yet because it's still missing some of those key components that activations have. That being, a clear context. That being all of the natural language that we use in real life, that being the final resolution that you get. And when you think about it, it does kind of make sense because in real life, no one has ever given me a piece of paper and said, answer these specific questions in real life. And if you look at our activation is the job interview. It's all of that natural language that goes into the process of going to a job, asking and answering questions, that natural language, that authentic feel, and of course, that final resolution where the interviewer has to decide which candidate they actually want. And just like that, we are ready for the activations. The context is going to be applying for a job at a travel magazine. The task is going to be about asking 8 questions to the different interviewees. And the final resolution for this is that the magazines have to pick the candidate who they think is best for the new job at their magazine. If I want to make things a little bit more dynamic and add a little bit more of a spin to it, I can make it where each magazine is looking for a different candidate. So maybe one of the magazines is more invested in adventure travel, so they want people that hike and snowboard and jump out of planes. I might have another magazine that is more interested in cultural things or food. And so this would make it where the interviewers really have to decide if the specific candidate, even if they have a lot of travel experience, is most suited for their company. And this strengthens my resolution, the motivation, the actual goal, because it forces the students to listen and to make those specific choices. Once the students have done this for a while, and maybe they switch groups and they switch places, and the interviewers are now the interviewees, and different people have magazines now, after about 10 or 12 minutes of them speaking, they will reach their resolution. We'll do some quick feedback to find out who the different magazines picked, and at this point we should be done, and we can end the lesson with about 2 to 5 minutes of error correction. But what if I have 15 minutes left? Yeah, there is the chance that you might have a longer class time, or your students might have run through this really, really quick. If that's the case, you have a couple different options. If it's a short amount of time, like 5 to 6 minutes extra, you can always go into a filler, and a filler is basically a warmer at the end of your lesson. If you have more than that though, if you're looking at 15 minutes of extra time, you can do what's called a follow-up. And a follow-up it's a speaking activity, it's related to your topic, but it doesn't necessarily have the grammar in there. So you might have a general discussion or a general debate about travel and different places to go. You might have students create, their top 10 destinations, which they want to see. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can potentially do. But if you're looking at 45 to 60 minutes, what we've gone over should basically cover all of those different things. So that's the whole lesson. I mean, that's basically all there is. And you can use this structure for any type of grammar lesson that you want. Obviously, if you are teaching a 2-hour lesson or a 3-hour lesson, you would add some more components to it. But for anything that's roughly 45 minutes to 60 minutes length, this will cover all of your bases. Thanks so much. Thanks for sticking with us. I hope you enjoyed the grammar series, and please subscribe and watch my channel for new videos on methodology and other teacher-related things. Thanks. Thank you.